So we're going to get started. My name is Kathy Morgan, co-president of the League of Women Voters of Ventura County. Thank you for coming today. I want to start off by saying I am not an expert on election observation, but we have an election worker here in the audience. Lillian Zielinski has worked as an election worker, so she can steer me right if I go wrong. However, I tried to gather some information to share with you today because I wish that when I first went to observe elections two elections ago, cycles ago, that I had been better informed and felt more prepared about what I was doing. Specifically, I didn't know what to look for. So in researching this, I found that the US League had an observation form. So along with Michelle's help, Michelle Ascension, our registrar of voter, and Pat Butler's help in formatting, I devised a election form, observation form that hopefully will guide people's observations. The U.S. League has to deal with many different jurisdictions. Everybody's elections laws are a little bit different. So I did have to make some changes. So in trying to get ready for this presentation, I did utilize the U.S. League's Election Observation Toolkit. I use the Ventura County Registrar of Office, their information, and the California Secretary of State. So those are my main sources for this. And I hope that, I hope it'll be helpful and that you'll feel a little more comfortable when you go to observe. These are the topics that I hope to cover today. Can you all see that second slide? Okay.
Yes.
We're going to go through the who, what, when, where, why of election observing, but not necessarily in that order, and then cover these other things. So the next slide is why observe elections. For the League of Women Voters, election observation presents a unique opportunity to observe the election process firsthand to ensure that all voters can exercise their right to vote, have their vote counted, and also for us to gather information about what's working and what's not so the process can be improved. Volunteer election observers are able to see firsthand the struggle that some voters go through at the polls, whether it's long lines or being turned away for not providing proper ID. Hopefully that doesn't happen so much in California, but I bet it does in other states. Lastly, and this is from Michelle, she says she's a real election nerd. Another reason to observe is for us to see democracy in action. I want us to keep in mind that other groups who are out there observing may have different motives as to why they're observing. I come into this believing that, for instance, that the system is working well, that the checks and balances are in place, and that, that when our election official tells us, for instance, that the voting systems are not connected to the internet, I believe them, but other groups do not. So one thing we might want to do is keep an eye, see what the observers are also doing. We can also be an extra set of eyes and ears to report problems to the election workers if we observe any voter intimidation or harassment. So those are some of the reasons to why we want to observe elections. So then who can observe elections? You can see the list here. Partisan observers, nonpartisan observers from bona fide, they call it Association of Citizens, media organizations, the public and international observers. Now, according to the VC Election Office guidelines, there may only be 2 representatives from each political party or like 2 representatives from our organization observing at one time. So in other words, we can go with a buddy, but we shouldn't go as a group because actually the area I don't know, by show of hand, have any of you besides me observed an election? Okay, yeah, the area where you were asked to stand is not very big. So, and I think Paul Burke raised his hand, he also observed. So they can't have too many people there. So the election official may limit the number of election observers permitted in an observation just to keep things under control. And they may have to resort, though I have never seen this, to a rotation of observers or a random lottery type drawing so that they can provide equal opportunity for those present. So that's pretty much the who can observe. Any questions about that? Okay, let's go on to when can you observe? Okay, you can observe prior to the election. Prior to the election, they do testing. They test, we'll talk a little bit more about what it is that they test, but you can observe prior to the election. We can observe during the elections. And in this particular election, we don't have as many not polling sites, vote centers as in the general or the primary. We will only have 18. 9 of those locations will open on Saturday, October 25th. The remaining 9 locations will open November 1st and remain open through Election Day, November 4th. Um, so we can we can observe during the voting process, and also on election night, we can go to the central counting office, which basically is the elections office at the government center, and we can observe there. There's also post-election observing, and that starts November 5th, and it continues through the election certification. By California law, county officials have 30 days to count every valid ballot and conduct the manual audit. So the post-election observation could go on for a whole 30 days. Okay. Where can you observe? So you can see it right here. We can observe at any of the vote centers, at the elections office, and you can also observe retrieval of ballots from the drop boxes. Now, I have never done that. But one of our former league members, she worked in the office, the elections office, with Mark Lunn when he was the registrar of voter. And she was sometimes sent to pick up, she and another person, to retrieve the ballots from drop boxes. So she reported that there were times when she would go to retrieve the ballots, and there would be observers there waiting for them to come, observing them unloading the ballots, putting them in the car, and then they would follow them. This was all the way from Simi to the elections office. So there are people who do observe the retrieval of ballots from drop boxes, and if you choose to do so, you can do that too.
Kathy,
Yes.
question. Do they have to be identified as observers, or can they just be?
I think when they're in their car, they don't, I mean, I don't, when we go, and we'll get there, but when we go observe in the vote centers or the election office, you do need to be signed in and observe, um, and have an ID that shows that you're an observer. I do not believe that's true for ballot boxes, but that is a question that Michelle couldn't be here today, but she told me I could write her, send out some questions and I can send that answer.
Or
So
at the vote centers?
at the vote centers, you have to check in. We'll get there.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on that one? Oh, okay. Yes. Then we're going to go to what can be observed. So pre-election day, you can observe the testing of all the voting equipment. That includes the tabulation equipment, the ballot marking devices, the voter lookup, and ballot printing systems, and so on. To do that, they put on their website when they're going to test different things. So you have to be observant. I've never myself caught the date to go and observe the pre-lat testing. So you have to be checking on the website, finding out when it's available, and going there for that. Lillian or Paul, have you ever observed the pre-lat testing?
I've been part of the pre-lap testing, but I've never observed.
Okay.
No,
Paul?
I've been there before the election started, seeing them processing the incoming mail ballots, but not for the equipment testing.
Yeah, I've been there to observe you can also vote pre-election. You can watch the processing of the vote by mail identification of envelopes and stuff. And I've seen that, but I just haven't seen the equipment processing. As we also mentioned earlier, you can watch the retrieval of ballots, election night activities. And then there's the 1% manual tally. So it's required by law that 1% of all voted ballots are randomly selected from the total election night batches be manually tallied and balanced against tabulator results to verify the accuracy of the election tabulation system. This is very interesting to watch. I have been there and watched it, and they're usually in groups, tables of 3 people. One person is reading from the ballot, and the other 2 people are marking down what that was said, and they're tabulating to see if it all matches up. And then there are, and so I think I
for that
counted
matter.
like 45 people there, not counting the supervisors who are walking around. So it's very time
Can't
intensive
answer right now.
Okay.
and very,
Broad part.
you know, they very deep, you have to be very detail
What
oriented.
is it?
So that's a,
So
what,
it doesn't say what it is.
can you mute? Thank you. So you have to, it's very interesting to watch. So you can watch that. You can watch all the ballot handling activities, the election night activities, everything that's on this form. I think Marcia doesn't have a question. The next is how to observe. Okay, well, you're going to want to make a plan and you're going to want to choose when and where you want to observe. And we don't all want to go to the same place because we already heard that there's, you know, you can only have 2 members from the same organization at one place, but also we're a big county and we need to try to spread out and cover as much ground as possible. Wear your league t-shirt and your observer badge. You'll sign in either at the vote center or the election office. They'll probably give you another tag to put on, and you will need to sign out when you leave as well. You will, you have received from me the Elections Division Code of Conduct, and you will want to familiarize yourself with that, though we'll be going over a lot of it today. They will either direct you where to stand or you can ask, you know, if they don't, you will have to ask them where to stand. It's not a very big area. Of the 8 or 9 places I observed over the last 2 elections, only once was I offered a chair to sit on. And that was probably because I was the only observer there. Plus, I kind of knew the person, the lead who welcomed me. If you want to bring your own water bottle, your cell phone should be on silent. And as I mentioned earlier, we now have a form that I'm hoping will be useful to record your observations. And I'd like for us to think that even positive observations are good. We don't have to be only looking for problems. We can look for good things, you know, and that things are going well, because it's just information that the elections office and we need to know that people's rights to vote are being protected. So that is how to observe. Then the next one, these are the core tenets of league observation. As I mentioned, other groups observing may have different motives for observing. Our strong emphasis should be on protecting the right to vote and observing that every legal ballot, you know, every voter, eligible voter, gets the chance to vote. Again, we want to focus on hotspots or locations most likely to encounter problems. When I met with Michelle and I asked her, do you think there are some areas that are more likely to be a problem than others? And she couldn't really say, except when I prompted her, which maybe wasn't fair, like, well, do you think Simi Valley? Or do you think, you know, she agreed that maybe that would be an area, maybe TO. She did say that she did not think, you know, the elections office at the government center is also a place where people can go to vote. She did not think that observers were necessarily needed there to observe. That would not be a hot spot because they have so many other people already present there. Plus, you know, they have security, they have all kinds of things. So she did not think that would be an issue at their spot, but she didn't really say where she thought would be a hot spot. The league wants us to rely on direct observations, what you see, what you hear, not necessarily what's, you know, when you're leaving, someone comes up and tells you or anything, but what you're seeing. And if you go more than one place, to use a different form, which I previously sent you for each location. We are not to proactively engage voters. We're to observe what's going on. We're observers. However, when we get to the do's, you'll see that if we see something that we're concerned about, there is something we can do about it. And I already said a sampling of a variety of locations. So that's the core tenets of league observation. Okay, then we have some do's. We are allowed, if we can do so without disrupting the process of voting, disrupting the duties of the election workers, to ask questions or address comments to the lead or co-lead of at that vote center. If you have noticed an issue and you don't feel that they are that particular person that you spoke with is doing anything about it, you could, if it's depending on how serious it is, you could step outside and call the elections office hotline, the number of which is on the form that you were sent. We are going to want to report any voter intimidation or electioneering immediately if we observe it. I'm hopeful we won't observe it, but the way things are going, I have increasing concern that maybe not this election, but in other upcoming elections, that may start happening. So we will want to know what voter intimidation is. It's illegal and a serious offense. Voters have a right to cast a secret ballot free from intimidation. It is a felony if a person makes use of or threatens to make use of any force, violence, or any other tactic of coercion or intimidation to compel another person to vote or refrain from voting. These kind of things can include blocking access to voting locations, presenting false information about voter eligibility requirement. For instance, they could tell people, oh, you don't speak English, you can't vote. That's not correct. Harassing or threatening behavior, challenging a voter's right to vote, and as I said, presenting false information. So if you see something, you want to say something, and you can inform the Vote Center lead or call the elections hotline. Maddie, I'll get to your question in just a second, okay? For your information, it is illegal for uniformed police officers or security guards to be stationed or loitering outside of a voter center. However, that does not mean that a uniformed police officer or security guard can't A, come in to vote, that's their right, or B, come if they are responding to a call. But if you do see a uniformed police hanging out in front of the polling place, that is illegal. There is also as it says here, if you need accessibility accommodations to be an observer, you need to submit a form. It is called the Reasonable Accommodation Request Form, and it is on the Ventura County Elections Office website, which is vote.venturacounty.gov, or you can call them to get more information. But in order to allow sufficient time for processing, all these request forms must be submitted at least 72 business hours prior to the need for accommodation. So Maddie, you had a question?
Yes, I was just wondering if we are allowed to take pictures if we see something happening that we think should be recorded.
I believe that we are not supposed to, let me see if I can find that page. I don't think
did.
we're,
Yeah, you put it in there, Kathy, that we're not to have our phones out or to take pictures at the voting centers.
yeah,
So no pictures.
yeah. But I suppose if you're outside, that's a different story. In fact, when I was chatting with Michelle and saying, you know, an issue in my mind is that how long can people stand? I can only stand, you know, maximum 45 minutes to an hour outside. And she says, well, you could sit in your car out in front and watch to see if anything untoward was going on. But if there's nothing going on, I don't know that that's the best use of our time. Any other questions on that? Okay, let's go to don'ts. Okay, these are, I think they're pretty easy to see. As it says right here, we don't disrupt election activity or process. We don't leave the designated observer area. Now, that was true when I was in the elections office observing the tabulation machines, the voter the signature verification, and the also the opening the envelopes and flattening the ballots. Even to move across the hall, you were supposed to raise your hand and wait for someone to come and escort you to the other side of the hall. Or when I was observing the voter signature verification, the door to leave was right there, but I was supposed to raise my hand. I haven't experienced that when I've been at a vote center. Usually when I'm done, I just go sign out and say I'm done. So, but you could always ask if you're unsure, or perhaps Lillian has some feedback on that. No feedback? Again, we're not going to perform any electioneering or communicate with voters regarding their qualifications, touch any voting materials or equipment. Let's see, scroll down thing. Okay. Okay, and also we don't want, I think you already know this, we already said we're going to go in our league t-shirts, but we're certainly not going to go in a t-shirt that says, pro one, one party or pro one candidate or message. We also shouldn't intentionally prevent other election observers from their observations. That's not nice. We wouldn't want them doing that to us. Directly challenge a voter, or here it says, photograph or record inside a vote center. Any questions on that?
I have a question from the previous one about leaving the space. Suppose you need a potty break.
You go ahead, Lillian. You're muted though.
No, I'm sorry. I was just, I wasn't going to say anything. No, anytime you make a move, you should, out of your designated area, you should, be acknowledged by the lead or co-lead and tell them what you want. It's just,
Okay.
Good manners.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
Okay. All right. Then what to watch for? So this is just a small sampling. The form I sent you has a lot more things on here that I didn't think we needed to go over every single thing. But I found it helpful when I was preparing this. I don't know how many of you have already watched Michelle Ascension's election education series. I saw them when she presented them in the at the Board of Supervisors, but there are also recordings of them on the website. And to refresh my mind about such things as provisional ballots and when they should not be used, I found it very helpful preparing for this to go back and look at when they're supposed to be used. But I'm going to give you a little break and just tell you right now so that you don't have to watch the whole thing. But so the first thing would be, is the check-in process efficient? Okay, and then a lot of people come in and may need a provisional ballot, and you want to know, are they being offered when necessary? So provisional ballots are issued when someone comes in and they'll tell you they haven't voted, but when they are looked up in the computer, it may say they already voted. So maybe they forgot, or maybe they made a mistake, or whatever, but they can vote again. If they're insisting they had not voted, they can vote again, and it would be a provisional ballot. In other words, it's set aside and it's researched more fully before it would be counted. Okay, so that's what a provisional ballot is. However, there's also something called a conditional voter registration / provisional ballot. Those are used at vote centers. Let's say you missed the October 20th registration deadline, or you failed to re-register after a change of address or whatever, and that makes the immediate verification of your voter status on their computers impossible. So they will vote one of these these provisional ballots. It'll be again set aside, and their eligibility will be researched and verified to determine if their ballot can be counted. So that's one thing that we're asking for people to look for. You want to look and respond positively or negatively to the election worker knowledge level and demeanor. There should not be political conversations taking place among the election workers. And looking for whether voters are given a help as needed. Are they giving someone to help them interpret? Are they given, if they are disabled, are they given help? There's questions about the length of lines and wait time, whether the voting equipment is working. Did they run out of printing supplies? I wanted to say run out of ballots, but Michelle, when I met with her, corrected that, because I was at a vote center one time where they had run out of ballots, but it's the paper, the ballot paper or the ink or whatever to print the ballot, because the ballots are printed for each voter when they come in, if they're not turning in the ballot that was mailed for them. And any voter in Ventura County can go to any vote center in Ventura County and get a ballot printed for their address, the one that's for them. That didn't used to be the case when we would have to go to our designated polling sites. And I think Maddie had a question, and I think I saw something in the chat from Paul, but Maddie, you want to go first while I look up Paul's chat?
Yeah. So actually, I I forgot my first question, but I do have another comment.
Okay.
Where you say, did they run out of printing supplies? Would you want to say they run out of ballot printing supplies? So that it still is clear that we're talking about the availability of ballots or
Well,
printing supplies for ballots or something like that.
Well, we could change it for ballots. I just know that that is one correction when Michelle went over my form, that no, not run out of ballots, run out of printing supplies, but printing
Right.
supplies for ballots, we can add that to the form.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And Paul Burke commented that it's easy for voters to forget to sign their provisional ballot envelope. We can watch for that. Hopefully the election worker there is watching for that. Would you say that would be the case, Lillian? And she's nodding her head yes. Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, then when I was researching what to look for at as an observer, there was a lot of information from other different groups about accessibility for people who are differently abled, for instance. And so part of that is on the form. Also, how easily is it easy to find the vote center? Is the signage there visible? Parking visible, available and abundant? Are the accessible voting devices functioning? Voters allowed assistance, and is there curbside voting available? And when I questioned Michelle Ascension, because I wasn't sure, is every vote center supposed to have curbside voting? She said yes. So hopefully we'll see that. But, I don't know that there's that many people who observe it. So unless you just ask the vote center workers, do you have curbside voting? You may not observe it. You may not be there when someone comes up to do that. And as I said earlier, I did use a lot of different sources of information to try and get this put together. And so these are the sources of information that I used. If I did have a couple of scenarios that I'm going to have to move this over because I can't see my notes up on the screen. The League of Women Voters on their training had a lot of different scenarios that you could, to say, what would you do if you were an observer and you saw this? And some of them don't work for us because we don't really have voter ID laws. We don't have voter ID laws in California, but I do want you to be aware that if you see someone ask for an ID, if you see an election worker ask for an ID in California, there are instances when they have to do that. For instance, if someone registered online but did not provide their identification material online or whatever, then they will be asked to show it. So don't be shocked if there are occasions where people are asked to show their ID. But some scenarios that the League of Women Voters presented for us to think about. Let's say you see a voter walk in with a whole stack of papers. Perhaps those papers are, electioneering kind of pamphlets or whatever. So they go into a polling booth, and then when they come out, they don't have anything. So possibly they're leaving their information behind purposefully to try and influence the subsequent voters. So if you see something like that, it is suggested that you go and inform one of the election workers to please check that booth. If you were to hear, I'm sure this would never happen, but if you were to hear a voter or an election worker, another election worker making discriminatory comments about someone, you would want to alert the lead election worker, as every eligible voter has a right to vote and should not feel intimidated. And then another scenario that the National League put up was, what if someone was asked to sign? They sign when they come in, they sign that form that has the stickers on it, and they can't for whatever reason, and so they're not allowed to vote. That should not be happen. Voters with disabilities should be assisted. And Lillian has a statement or a question. Probably a statement.
Yes, one thing Paul had mentioned, checking for signatures. One thing that gets to be a little bit tricky is some people have a ballot that's already completed, the envelope is closed and signed, and they just want to drop it off at the door. And so there's somebody that's checking that. And that gets a little bit tricky because a lot of people drop off ballot envelopes for other people. And so that requires them to sign that they are dropping off. So that's something to check. The voter needs to sign and check it off, and whoever is dropping it off. And sometimes there's a big pile that you have to go through. So that's something to watch for.
Well, if there are no more questions, that's all I have for today. Thank you for attending. I hope that you will find that this gives you enough information to feel confident being an election observer. Have a good afternoon. Goodbye.